First of all, I would like to welcome Vivan Marwaha
Thank
to
you.
the International Center Goa, his first visit, and with his first book. I think I got in touch with Vivan maybe a few months ago on Twitter.
Yes.
That was when you were writing your book, and he was quoting from various newspaper articles that he was writing on the subject, and it was forthcoming what millennials want. And I said, look, at some point, once the book is done, you must come to Goa. And you usually travel between the US and India,
Yes,
Delhi and,
yes.
and the United States. So he said, look, as soon as the book is out, I'll be in India and I'll be promoting the book. So I said, okay, we have to find time then. And the thing is, right now we thought we had an opening, and he's going to be on his book tour in the next few weeks, months. And it was always going to be difficult to find time again. And if we have the pandemic coming back and restrictions of all kinds coming into place again, so it would have been a missed opportunity. So welcome, Vivan.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I think it's a great read. And I must say I haven't read every single word in the book, but I read through every chapter, parts of every chapter. And I think it's just a fantastic book that needed to be written. And one of the things Vivan and I have been discussing earlier is how a similar book needs to be written by him 10 years from now. To see how things have changed, how much things have changed. And of course, it will be a different set of people who will be millennials at that time, or we'll have another term for them. In your introduction, you mention the different labels that are used for Indians born before independence, the first 2 decades after independence, then the All India generation, that would be me and a few of us, and after that is the Doordarshan generation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I don't know 10 years from now what each one of these generations will be called, but definitely a book needs to be written 10 years from now to look at how young Indians think about a whole range of issues, whether it is about education, whether it is their political attitudes. I was a bit surprised to see that there wasn't an independent chapter on religion, somewhat. It's covered under social attitudes and marriage. There's an independent chapter on that, because I thought that was something pretty important. But of course, you do talk about religion, and we discussed this earlier, that religion definitely is a very important aspect of India. For young people, for older people, for people of all generations, really. And it's not something which we can wish away, and should not think that it can be wished away. And we go back to the idea that with modernization, religion becomes less important, or with prosperity, people, church attendance drops and so on. But here, prosperous people are typically quite religious very often. And so westernization, modernization, all these erode the relevance of religion in everyday life. But it's not really that simple. That has not happened in many countries around the world. And in countries going through economic difficulties, church attendance, at least studies on Europe show that church attendance once again goes up. So even in so-called secular countries where religion has declined in everyday life, at times of economic hardship, social hardships, people do turn to religion. But other than that, I thought all the chapters are fantastic, very, very relevant to what we see around us in contemporary India. And let me begin with a very, very straightforward question, which is what persuaded you to write the book? I mean, you really are very young. So you must have started to work on this book maybe 5 years ago. I don't know what I was doing at your age, but I was certainly not thinking about writing a book,
So yes, I am 26. So I feel really old. When I turned 26, I was like, oh my God, like I'm not 25 anymore. And psychologically, it has a big impact. What persuaded me, thank you, Pushkar, for having me here, and everyone for being here. we're getting a very intimate conversation this evening. What persuaded me to write this book, so I was working at a think tank in Delhi, and I was doing really interesting work. We were doing, at the time, there's this data protection legislation that was being debated. It's still being debated 4 years later. And I got to represent the organization I was working at different consultations with ministers, members of parliament, all of that. And I began to realize that, we're throwing around these terms like AI and machine learning and fourth industrial revolution and, things like that, but without really understanding who will be impacted by these trends and these developments. And it's young people, it's people my age. With no offense to the esteemed policymakers, who have worked in government for very long, but India has a median age of 28, and we have the world's largest population of young people. And I just felt that there was not a lot of understanding about the lives of young Indians and what young Indians really want, and are they able to achieve those aspirations. And sort of the way I came upon this realization is my grandparents live in Bhopal, which we call a small town in India, but is really a city of 1.5 million people, which is urbanizing. And someone who works in their broader environment, he delivers mail. He's in the book. He delivers mail to their house, and he has a BTech in engineering. And my grandmother sort of told me, this guy has a BTech, and I was like, why is he delivering mail? And I ended up chatting with him, and we spoke for quite a bit of time, and that's when I began to realize we're not talking enough about these people. That we have this massive population that has got these degrees, and no matter what the quality of those degrees is that they have spent the time and money and energy into acquiring those degrees, and then they don't have the jobs commensurate with their education. And so at some level that we failed to provide those kinds of jobs. And so the book sort of really, the genesis of it was that I wanted to talk about people we don't always hear from in the media, and we definitely never hear about in Bollywood. And so my main goal was to go out to small towns and cities. And so my research has not just been in Madhya Pradesh, but in Kerala. I went to Calicut, Kottayam, Cochin area, Mysore in Karnataka, Coimbatore, really all over the country, and to talk to young people and really understand what their lives are, and what we're missing out in Delhi and Mumbai and Bangalore. So that's kind of where the book was born. That was the idea, and the reason why I wanted to write it is because I wanted a young person to tell these stories, and not someone who does not belong to our generation. Because I believe there's a level of empathy that comes when you are writing about people your age, and when you all have similar experiences. And so I definitely, age was on my side in this time while I was writing the book. You have to hold it down a little bit.
You mentioned that in passing, that you travel to a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And I think that's another one of the best things about the book is that it relies on data collected by the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, CSDS, where Sanjay Kumar has actually focused quite a bit on the youth, but mostly in terms of how they vote, and also a bit more than that. But again, when we talk about young people, we are always city-centric or metro-centric, so to say. So that's something that your book does remarkably well. And this is a topic which has picked on in the sense that Snigdha Poonam's book earlier, your book earlier, and I think there are a couple of other books on similar themes coming out. Let's talk a little bit about the chapter on education. And he told us the story about somebody who delivered mail and had a BTech. Now, these are stories from all over the country, where young Indians, now no longer so young, many of them, have acquired a variety of degrees, and with the hope, with the expectation that they would end up with relatively prestigious white-collar jobs. And there are no exceptions. I mean, I don't think there is any exception anywhere in the country where you do not have hundreds of thousands of people with such degrees. Even though, of course, the percentage of college-going population in the country is still relatively low. But in these second and third-tier cities, you have an abundance of people. Now, with degrees and with low-wage jobs. Jobs they could have done, maybe with even a school leaving degree or a +2 or whatever degree. What do you think has happened there in the education sector? I mean, I don't want to bring in my perspective, but I want to hear from you. What do you think has gone wrong there in terms of the aspirations? You use the term aspirations and anxieties. These are the things. So the anxiety part is gone for one half of that generation, who know that they are not going to be able to do anything better than what they are doing right now. But there's another generation which is headed to college or is already in college. For many of them, they are going to end up the same way. Now, what do you think has gone wrong there?
So, I mean, the book is definitely told from a point of view of the people I met, and there's very little of my own opinion in there. And it's the people I was talking to, what their views are. And so I think to answer your question about what went wrong, there's a lot of other people who could answer that. But in what went wrong in the people I met and why they weren't able to get the best jobs available or definitely available for their qualifications is that, number one, the economy is just not creating any jobs, period. So, and this is a phenomenon that the more educated you get, the higher the unemployment and the fewer there are available jobs. And so what's gone wrong in that case is that there's just not enough job creation. But what I sort of saw in the people I was meeting, and a lot of them were first generation learners, so they were first generation college graduates, is that their families had sort of sold some land, and so they had a little bit of money in the household, and then they were told by everyone, by politicians and government policies that, education is what's going to give you social mobility, and education is this panacea to all your problems. So send your kid to school, send them to college, get them another degree after that. And what's happened is that people are just getting degrees, and they're getting one degree after another. But there's still, then you come to the job side, and there's still not enough jobs that are available for them. Then in other states, like Madhya Pradesh, for example, a lot of families have incomes because of welfare programs. And now whatever their plot of land used to be, their farm, earlier it used to support 2 sons, but now you have 3 sons and 3 daughters, and not everyone can be supported off that same plot of land. So you say, okay, one son goes to college and is going to make a life in the city. But then that son actually has it the worst because there are no jobs available. And then also the quality of education is a big problem, because in my book I kind of trace the history a little bit about how we started with these IITs and IIMs, and the good quality ones have stayed the same, but then you have thousands of with really dubious quality that have sort of mushroomed and are not really serving any purpose but for churning out degrees. And then finally, a scholar whose work I rely on a lot, his name is Karthik Muralidharan. He's a professor, and an economist, and he studies education quite a bit. And what he says is that India doesn't have an education system as much as a filtering system, and that we're just filtering people towards opportunities, and the same opportunities that existed 30 years ago. So that's IIT, IIM, medical school, and then UPSC. And again, if you go to any coaching, any area with lots of coaching centers, all of the boards say, IIT, UPSC, and then medical. And now there's some finishing schools and English language programs and things like that. So it's like a really, lots of things sort of, again, I'm not best qualified to talk about, what is wrong with the system. But what's gone wrong with millennials is that my generation was sold this story that, you go to school, you go to college, and you'll have a good life. And people have done that, and there is no good life that's available because there's the whole job side of the equation that did not ever get realized.
I mentioned already. I already mentioned earlier that I would have liked to see a chapter on religion, but and this is something again. Vivan has been here since yesterday, so I have had the opportunity to be chatting separately with him on a range of issues, and which is what does your generation? I mean, how does it see religion? One, very in a very broad sense. Second, whether or not it is in your book or not, but you have interacted at length with people across the country of this age group. One, how do they say religion? What role do they see for religion in public life, in politics? And how does religion inform, and this is your chapter, their social values? Is it independent? I mean, obviously it's not independent of religion, but marriage and social values more broadly.
So that's a great question. It's one of the reasons I did not. I mean, I've tried attacking it. I mean, I've tried getting at it in many different ways across different chapters in the book. One thing I write, which there's data to back this up, is that millennials say they're very religious, but they don't actually know a whole lot about religion. So I met a lot of people who are saying, I'm a proud Hindu, proud Muslim, proud Christian, but then if you actually ask them to tell you about the tenets of those religions or their texts, they actually don't know a whole lot about them. Or even something basic like, okay, you're a proud Hindu, like, do you go to the temple often? Or do you offer namaz? Or do you go to the church on Sunday? And most people say no. But then they say, oh, but we are very religious, right? And I think there's many factors that play into this. Number one is that religion provides a really crucial identity that a lot of millennials in particular, more than previous generations, lack. And what that identity I'm talking about earlier, like 30 years ago, if you lived in a small town or in a village, you could be very open about your caste and that I'm this caste and that's my identity. And by function of that being your caste, that was also your profession, right? Nai was a barber. But today, very few Nais are actually barbers. So caste is still important, but it's not as fashionable to be so open about it. And the linkage between caste and occupation is also reduced. So in that absence of that identity, people have turned to religion. Now, again, there's no, you don't get any cred or any plus points in most parts of India by saying I'm a proud atheist and I'm a proud secular person, right? Nobody ever says that. And so it's like we all have this common identity that we are all proud Hindus or we're all proud Christians. And in that you can find a whole lot of commonality with other people. And you can also, now going to millennials and being in an economy that's not creating enough jobs, you can also blame others for your problems. So if you are in an area that there's not a lot of employment or prosperity, you can say that, our jobs are being taken away by someone from another community, which is, quite a persuasive explanation for a lot of people with what's happening nowadays. So it's that, religion has not, I would say millennials are much less pious than previous generations, but because so many other things, including technology, that we live in sort of this global village where you can consume content made in LA sitting, in Lucknow. It's really led to this erosion of the traditional identity in the Indian sense. And so the most fashionable identity now is the religious identity, which is also, of course, being used for political gain. And so that's sort of the broader thesis of religion and millennials right now. But in my book, I actually cite more specific data about how millennials view religion. And what I found really interesting is that educated millennials, a majority of educated millennials, say that religion should take precedence over science. And I can cite the figure. It's near page 100. And a majority of millennials say that films that hurt religious sentiments should be banned. And of course, then, that number goes higher for things like, eating meat and beef and all of that. But also a majority of millennials don't want to celebrate Valentine's Day, which it's not really a religious thing, but it's like it's a broader, phenomenon of society and culture. And so what I'm really getting at over here is that the big factor is insecurity, that I don't have an identity anymore, I don't have a job, I don't have many of these things that have traditionally given young people stability. So religion provides that stability and it provides that identity. And I'm just going to speak for another minute about a woman I met who is not in the book. I met her earlier this year. She's the member of a cult in North India that was the subject of a lot of news a few years ago, because the leader of that cult had been arrested on charges of rape and sexual assault and things like that. And I met this lady, and she was still a hardcore follower of this sect. And I asked her why. Why do you still believe in all of this? And she told me that the ashram is the only place in the world where she's actually safe. The ashram where other women have been assaulted was the only place that she felt safe, because in her village, after the sun sets, she can't go out. She can't talk to anyone. And even when she can go out, she can only talk to people within her family or to other young women. But at this ashram, she can really talk to anyone, young men, young women, older people, and she can have these amazing interactions that young people anywhere in the world take for granted, but she's provided that at the ashram. And when she tells her family, "Arey, main to ashram ja rahi hu," nobody questions that. No one can question it because she's going to the ashram. So it's really a place of liberation for her, where she has these amazing interactions with people her age that she does not get in her everyday life. And sort of religion or spirituality provides her with that identity and with that protection. So it's really a lot of factors, but the key one over here is the insecurity angle.
What we'll do is, I know, I'm not sure how many of you have read the book. It has been, it was released about a couple of months ago, but irrespective, this is a topic which is an open one. This is about anybody and everybody who lives around us, whom we interact with, whether within our circle of friends and families and so on. So if you have any questions, we'll take a couple of questions from people sitting here and then come back to my questions. Of course, I have greater privilege, so I'll be I'll be asking most of the questions. Okay.
I have a question. Am I audible? Oh, but mic.
It'd be great if you could also introduce yourself before.
My name is Tino Disa, and I've moved to Goa very recently, a few months ago. I lived in Bhopal before this. So.
And we also know each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
I belong to the same service that Vivan's grandfather does. Anyway. So, Vivan, congratulations on this absolutely amazing book. For a book to be so, the depth of understanding that you've shown, and more than just all the data you've collected, but the reflection on that data in someone so young is really extremely amazing. Congratulations. And I entirely agree with Dr. Pushkar that you should be writing another book 10 years from now. But I think you should call that What Millennials Got. This is what they want, and what they actually get is something that's yet to see. Anyway, my question is, we've already been talking about religion and all these depressing things that you'll have been saying, because I actually come from a generation where it was fashionable to say, I'm a proud secularist,
Yes.
the old Nehruvian kind of atmosphere in India, and Hindi films and all, which always celebrated actually being quite secular. And things have changed so much. But contrary to what you have been talking about, in the concluding chapter of your book, you speak about Kerala, and you say that, people getting together in a cafe, talk to each other, and it's not religion that they are talking about, not Ayodhya or cow slaughter or things like that, but they are more concerned about, politics and communism and capitalism and jobs. And very often people belonging to the same religion belong to different political parties. And it was very heartening to read to read that. Now, Kerala is a state where perhaps the only state in India where there is a significant proportion of all three major religions in India. Unlike anywhere, you have states where you have two religions, like say in Goa and many other states. Many states have only one dominant religion, but Kerala has a 20% Christian, 25% Muslim, 55% Hindu. How do you think, I mean, one would have imagined that such a situation in fact would have contributed to greater angularities, and yet in your concluding chapter you find, you say that you found that that is not so. So clearly something must be happening in Kerala which is not happening in other parts of the country. In your research and in your interactions, can you give some explanation for this?
So thank you for that, and I do talk about Kerala in the conclusion, and not to romanticize it, but to say that in many ways it can be a model, or it can be a template for the rest of the country, that you have a generation less divided in itself. And the reason why that is, or what I identified after speaking to other people as well, is that there's a lot of economic interdependency between the three communities. And Kerala is one of the few places in India where you also have middle-class Muslims, because usually you have very rich and then a critical mass that's extremely poor. In Bhopal, which I'm sure you're familiar, the entire community just lives in one part of the town, in one part of the city, and there's almost no interaction between the two communities outside of that one neighborhood. But in Kerala, what happens is that everyone is sort of has a certain level of income, and of course there's the whole literacy angle. But because there's this level of income, if you're a Muslim shopper buying from a or let's flip it, if you're a Hindu store owner, your clients and your customers are people from all three communities. So it's not in your interest to go and create enmity and to start a riot. In Cochin, for example, the Mattancherry market over there, the store owners are all Christians, the shoppers are all Muslims, and the operators, the shopkeepers, are all Hindus. And when you have so many linkages between the communities, there's literally no economic case, and you would be hurting yourself if you went out and created that animosity. And so in other parts of India where there has been communalism, there's not a whole lot of interactions that different communities have with each other, and definitely not that much economic interdependency. Because at the end of the day, if I am going to be out of business tomorrow, then it's really not in my interest to go and stir up violence and hate. And so that's sort of one of the things I identified. And what was really heartening for me to see in Kerala, and Kerala was actually the last state I really visited while I was doing my research, because a lot of my work before that was kind of North India and Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, and someone read my manuscript and told me that, what the hell, like, how can you not go to Kerala? And because in the other states where I went to and I talked to young people, everyone was from the same community. So there'd be tables, but everyone was the same caste group or the same sort of income level. But in Kerala, you see tables, at cafes, there'll be Muslim girls, some with their head covered, some not, Hindus, Christians, everyone, and they're all sitting together and they're talking about Marx and philosophy and communism, and whether the communist government was doing better in job creation or whether the Congress would do better because the elections had just ended at the time. And I was like, this is, these are the substantive issues that, young people in other countries talk about. And I was seeing that happening in Kerala, which you don't see in a lot of other parts of India. So I think what I'm really getting at over here is that there's a lot of economic interdependency, and that's sort of the extent of it. Some people, I was at an event in Bangalore right before this, and there were a lot of Malayali millennials who were there, and this is something I acknowledge in the book as well, is that interdependency, it ends at economic linkages, and it doesn't go beyond that. So people will celebrate Onam, Eid, and Christmas, but then further than that, it does not extend, which is fine, right? I'm not here to tell people how they should live or who they should date, but you still have those ties that exist because of a common a common base of community and cultural ties and things like that, which is not in other parts of India.
Hi, Vivan.
Hi. We are also friends. So
yes.
Siddharth wrote a book called The Great Smog of India, which I highly recommend. And we bumped into each other in Delhi and now over here.
Thank you. I'm here, in fact, because the Great Smog of India is in Delhi.
Yes.
So I've escaped that. I'm here. No, thank you. Firstly, congratulations. And I'm very glad to see you here in Goa. Two very quick questions. The first is, now that yesterday the Prime Minister came out and made a declaration that India will have net zero emissions by the year 2070. So in the next 50 years, you'd like to see a lot of disruptions, especially among coal miners, among other regions which are dependent on the fossil fuel economy. So as those disruptions happen, do you think, or what are your experiences been, do millennials understand climate change? Do they understand why these changes are being made? And what the consequences of inaction could potentially be. The second question is, do millennials read? This is a time of social media and TikTok and everything else. In your experience, has there been a culture of people picking up books and reading?
I wish millennials read. I wish they read this book. Please, if you guys, millennials don't really read, but please do read this book. And so I answered your second question first. I'll start with that millennials largely are not reading right now. And I don't know how many, if this is like just a millennial thing or with other generations as well. But, with social media, I myself, when I pick up a book, I get so distracted by these 10 other things that are going on that I haven't read many of my friends' books because I have all of this other stuff that's going on. Some news alert pops up on your phone, or someone posted sent you a meme, and it's distracting. So, to answer your question, millennials are not really reading, and I wish that they read more. And in the book, I, of course, talk about information a lot and where people are getting their information from, which is largely from social media. So it's not even from traditional media. It is a little bit from internet media, so places like Quint and Facebook pages, which of course also have a very nefarious downside to them. But no one is really reading traditional newspapers or books anymore. And then about the climate change question is that people, to be honest with you, are not talking about it. So it's a South Delhi, South Bombay, Bangalore issue, where I would say it is a concern for a lot of English-speaking, type of people. But, at the end of the day, there's a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you don't have a job, or when you don't have a financial security, climate change is something that's not in your top 10 issues that really affect your life, because I don't have a job, I don't know how I'm going to feed myself, I don't know how I'm going to live, I don't know where I'm going to live. So climate change is not something that really affects a lot of people or people have thought about. But I have met people who have been greatly affected by climate change. So I've met climate refugees, people who lost their homes in flooding in Kerala, actually, when I was there. And these are people who lost their entire livelihoods. Their villages were swept away in those floods. So it's something that is affecting a lot of people, but not directly. So it's not that, if a company shuts shop somewhere because, let's say their business was dependent on the weather and now 10 people have lost their jobs, I'm not sure whether those 10 people will be able to correlate that to climate change or just the fact that they were unlucky and we lost our jobs. So it's definitely not something I actually have to be honest with you, I've not heard even one person talk about climate change.
In the 90s, when the internet really exploded, and a bit later in India, there was the prevailing view that it would change the world. And the period of anti-globalization protests in the 2000s, the use of social media to organize, to protest, and so on and so forth. All those great things happened, and then you had these people who really said, and probably some of them believed that too, that it would have a democratizing impact and overall a very, very positive impact on the lives of people, young and old alike. Recent research is showing that while internet use has expanded, and of course we can talk about lack of access, and in India that's still quite true, but even in those cases where young people or anybody has access to the internet and greater access to the internet, the people who believed in the power of the internet to bring about positive change assumed that the internet would be used by everyone. Somebody who is poor, somebody who is looking for, who is aspirational, would use it to look for jobs, for example, or to train themselves for education. And this is also relevant in terms of online education, which has really taken off the last couple of years. And then they found that people everywhere, irrespective of their class and race, really use the internet for the same things, irrespective of whether they're rich or poor, for entertainment, for time pass, for those things. The people you interviewed, how did they relate to the use of technology and social media in a very broad sense? And I'm asking this question also because not everyone has read the book, and also what you have written in the book is, and what you're going to talk about is going to be somewhat different, I think.
No, I think that the greatest equalizer in India has been the internet. And, prior to smartphones being widely available and data being the cheapest in the world, which it is in India, a young woman, again, in Bhopal never had the same opportunities as a young man in Bombay. And today she does. She really does. And you can access all types of professional opportunities, but also educational ones, and even content and entertainment that was earlier completely off limits to people in the majority of India. And the internet has made that possible. I've met so many people who have upskilled themselves through the internet and who've accessed these types of opportunities that would have never been available to them earlier. In the book, I write about two stories, and I'll share them over here. The first one is of a lady named Nazneen, who is a domestic abuse survivor, and she got married, and she was in Qatar, and her husband started beating her, and she fled and came back home to Hyderabad, and she was 6 months pregnant, and she was obsessed with YouTube. And if you go on YouTube, is very easy to go in a rabbit hole, and once you're in that rabbit hole, you never leave. And her rabbit hole was watching these makeup tutorials, and she was watching these makeup tutorials that were in Hindi and other Indian languages, about how to apply makeup and all of that. And she was obsessed with these makeup tutorials. And she has her kid, and she realizes, okay, well, I need to occupy myself. So she starts putting makeup on girls in her neighborhood. Then she gets really good at it, and she's like, okay, maybe I can do bridal. So bridal, is a huge business. Bridal makeup is a huge business in the marriage business in India. And so she starts doing bridal makeup. Then she's like, okay, too many people are asking me, let me hire someone. And she's in her parents' living room. She hires someone. Then she gets really good at that and learns more skills. And she opened her own salon, when I first met her. And her story would never have been possible without the internet. Just think about it, 20 years ago, a domestic abuse survivor, becoming an entrepreneur in a matter of years, and going from living in her parents' house to supporting her parents, again, in a matter of years, would never have been possible. Another person I talk about is someone I met named Sumit Samos, and he's a Dalit rapper from Odisha. He was actually just a student at JNU in 2015-16, and he found that he's really interested in activism, but every campus organization at JNU JNU was headed by these Brahmins who just wanted him to stick posters on walls, and he's like, okay, maybe this is not what I care about. And so he started rapping, and nobody really watched his videos at first. And then Rohit Vemula's suicide, after that, he uploaded a video and it ended up going viral. And since then, he's performed in Paris, he's performed in Mauritius. And when I met him, I was on Barkha Dutt's show. She'd invited me on, and Sumit was there to rap. And I was like, this is, I read more about him. I was like, this is an incredible story. And just this year itself, Sumit applied to Oxford, and he got in for a master's in South Asian studies. But hear this, he did not get a scholarship, so he didn't get a Rhodes or an INLAX or whatever would take someone there. So what did he do? He went onto the internet, he went onto Twitter and Facebook, and he started a fundraiser. And he crowdfunded his way into Oxford. He raised 50 lakhs from people all over the world on the internet, and he's there right now as we speak. And imagine a Dalit boy from Orissa, making their way into Oxford and becoming an icon for his community and really becoming one of those leading voices for his community. It was because of the internet. Now, these are just two individuals, but if you think about it, in a lot of places in India, the public space is still inaccessible to minorities and to women. And they don't feel comfortable in these public spaces that they can, meet other people from their community and really, talk. But on the internet, they can. They can do that. They can find other people who like-minded people, and they can have these interactions with them, and they can become friends, virtually and then physically as well. And so it's really created those possibilities when none existed earlier. Now, of course, there's also an underbelly to that. But what I have found, and I thought hard about this, is that the positives far outweigh the negatives. And I do know people who've been radicalized by the internet. Some people who are very close to me have been radicalized by content they've seen online. And I think everyone knows someone or the other like this. But my sort of view on that is that this was going to happen anyway. The internet just sped it along. It's just a medium. But it was going to happen anyway. And the real story that we need to be talking about is how do we get even more, how do we squeeze it for even more opportunities? And so there's some really cool startups that are doing work in the education space, in the skilling space, in the, in giving housewives, sitting in Nagpur a job that, someone was previously doing in Bombay. And just, how do we keep expanding that cape of inclusion as opposed to talking about, which obviously we do need to talk about the downsides, but I do believe that the positives far outweigh the negatives, just in terms of, the number of people who've had their lives completely transformed because of the internet. Yeah.
I think I have just two more questions before I again go back to the audience. One is that when we look at this group, 400 plus million, how do they locate themselves in relation to the generation above them, their parents, and the generation below them? I think they would not be giving much thought to the generation below them, but but their parents. How do they see, appreciate, or understand what happened before their time? So I'm not exactly asking about their understanding of history, but I'm asking about their understanding or appreciation of the kind of life their parents led. Because, as parents, let's say I will pass on particular stories about our childhood, where you had Doordarshan or All India Radio, or, color television arrives in Delhi in 1982 Asian Games. That's a landmark thing. And these, or, Mrs. Gandhi's assassination in 84. Now, these are for my generation important events, right? But for the millennials, how do they relate to them? The past, and it would not just be what they get from history books, but also the stories that are told to them by their parents. Did you get a sense that what happened in the past or in their parents' lives, these particular big events, do these events matter to them? So that's the first one. The second one is actually unrelated to this, so I'll let you answer this first.
Okay, that's a tough question. I haven't always asked people about about what you had asked me. But to hypothesize, what I would say is that this is a bit of a it's a bit of a generalization, but in a lot of the people among a lot of the people I was talking to, is that parents are not your friends. You know, they are not people who you chat with. And I'm just, being real right now. This is not my experience. No, this is not my experience, but in a lot of, really sort of lower middle class households where parents have a lot to deal with, they just sort of tell you what to do and you do it, right? And there's no conversation that happens apart from that. It's not like, oh, this used to be my childhood, and like, let me go show you where I grew up, and that's where I went to college and where I met my girlfriend. No, those experiences didn't happen, and those stories are not recounted. And what I found, and the data backs this up, the number one anxiety that Indian millennials, I don't know for those who read the book if they saw the figure, is that 91% of Indian millennials list their parents' health as their top anxiety. And that's because your parent is your protector, and you're dependent on them. So again, I just want to fully state that I did not actually ask this question of my respondents, but if I were to hypothesize, this would be it.
One last question from me, which is again not part of your book, but something to again speculate on. And we were talking about education earlier, and this is one of my favorite topics. I get to it with lots of people, which is that the millennials were sold on the idea that education will improve your life chances, right? And that is why they got all these degrees. That is why they have their parents have borrowed from banks. NPA's student debt is going to become a big issue, though it's not really talked about. Fastest growing in terms of NPAs, at least according to some of the research that's been done. And there is some very interesting research by some sociologists which counters the view that education, because it improves one's life chances, it also leads to peace and prosperity, right? And that was the UNESCO idea for a long time. And the counter view that is not necessarily influential in all places is that the kind of education that millennials in India, for example, are getting, and in the context of the kind of diversity we have in India, not just in terms of religion, but in terms of caste, in terms of gender, and because of migration, again, insider, outsider, across India, where in the cities particularly, but also you can see a bit of that in just about every state which receives a fairly large number of immigrants from other states, is that education heightens the possibility of social conflict. Now, on the other hand, talking to several people, not just you also find out that most millennials tend to be more tolerant, more open to all sorts of things, not just about religion, marriages, and so on. Although, it's not important at this point what their actions are, in which direction their actions are. So, do you get a sense, and again, this is completely speculative, do you get a sense that education of the kind that we have been getting for at least the last 20, 30 years, it is leading to a situation sometime in the future, and some would say there are signs of it already in the past, where these frustrations and anxieties of maybe even two generations, given the kind of diversity we have and given the kind of politics. I mean, if you're kind, we say there is a social churning going on, and you had that in the 80s and 90s. Yogendra Yadav wrote about it, talking about the second democratic second democratic revolution or something. But the point is that if those aspirations are not met over two generations, what can go wrong?
So one thing that I've found in the people that I've met is that people are very pessimistic about their own lives, but they're very optimistic about the country. And this sort of comes out in the politics as well. So again, 2019 elections, I was traveling all over, and again, to cite some examples from Madhya Pradesh, I was talking to young people over there, and some of these people had not had jobs in years, and they were completely financially insecure. I met, men many years older than me who had to ask their parents for money to buy a ticket to the movies. And these are not PVR type of tickets. These are 50 rupee tickets, 25 rupee tickets. And they had to ask their parents. Imagine that, a 27, 28-year-old guy doing that. And he was an engineer. I still remember, his name and all of that. And his own life wasn't going well. But he was very optimistic about India. And, India is doing so well. The government is doing so many great things. And I did not get any sense that this person is someone who's going to come out and protest. And I'm saying peacefully protest. Now, in many other countries, in many European countries that have similar or lower levels of unemployment in India, the youth have been out protesting for months, in Spain, in Greece, and, in many other countries. In France, the yellow vest protests, fuel went up a little bit and you saw what happened. Over here, fuel is completely unaffordable to most young people. It's completely unaffordable and nobody is doing anything. There's no agitation. There's no one's demanding that their MLAs or the MPs, do something about this. And what does that really say is that, people are sort of broadly okay with what's going on. And the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because the point I'm getting to is that a lot of young Indians today they don't blame anyone for their circumstances, really. Or they say that, if I don't have a job, it's because of me. It's because I'm not good enough. It's never because the government should be creating the conditions for job growth, and it has not done that. Or it's never that, maybe the right types of jobs are not prioritized in this country, or that there's no investment that's trickling, any of these other reasons. So to get to the education point, I don't see that being this is something you had to do, right? You had to go to school, and for some people, you had to go to college. So you didn't really have any choice in that. Now, if you don't have a job, too bad, tough luck. That's my fault, and there's no one else who's responsible for it. It's just how it is. And so I don't see that being a particularly, big emotive issue among millennials right now. And but what I did find is that, just share, a personal example. When I was 13, when the Beijing Olympics happened, and it was amazing, the bird's nest, and so many of people my age, we saw what was going on in China, and back then you had the 5 years of Vajpayee ji, and the economy had grown so much, and then the first couple of years of UPA1, and the economy had also grown double digits, and there was this great sense of optimism at the time that India is just a few years away, just a matter of time until we catch up with China. And I know I was a super nerdy 13-year-old who read The Economist, but that's what The Economist also said. And now with 13 years away from that, it's been 13 years, and it feels like China is a generation away from me. I don't think my generation will ever see India achieve China's level of prosperity. And I'm not trying to, hold up China as a great model, and I'm definitely not. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of what was promised by the Prime Minister in 2014 is what China has right now, in terms of the bullet trains, in terms of the jobs for the youth, in terms of the infrastructure and all of that. And that has not been delivered. And there's no path. A lot of people still don't believe that's going to be delivered in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so, what's going to happen is really anyone's guess. But I don't think that millennials in India are predisposed to blame the government for their problems. It's more that this is an individual problem. And I'm not good enough, which is why I have these conditions that I'm in.
Just going back to what you said, right? I haven't read your book. It is Andy's book, but he found it so intriguing that every now and then he would sit down and say, "Can I read you a few pages?" And I'd love to listen. I'd be washing up or something.
I love that.
No, it's seriously. That's how I've got to know so much about your book. I'll come to what I really want to say, but where you say that the youth of India don't protest the way the rest of the country, or the world does, I personally believe it's because of the education system, because we've been taught to shut up and listen to the blackboard. Do not ask questions.
Yeah.
So the youth will not ask questions. They will not hold anybody else accountable, because our parents have always told us, have brought us up, and so have our teachers, never to ask questions. Not really. The new generation in Bombay and the cities, etc., they are in better schools and they are more opinionated now. Yeah. But where you have been, the second-tier cities, the whole country, it's going to take a long, long time.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because today's parents were yesterday's students who were out protesting when the Mandal Commission report came out.
All over the country.
All over. I know so many people. I know of that generation who were protesting when that report came out. And then prior to that, you of course had the entire Indra Gandhi, I wasn't around then, but you had the entire Indra Gandhi emergency agitations, which was once again a mass movement.
That was
Yeah, and so you have that in the 70s, you have the Mandal stuff in the 90s, and the Ayodhya stuff as well. But since then, there's never been anything really like that. And maybe it's those people who protested then are telling their kids, okay, you guys don't protest now. Yeah. So maybe, maybe that's the case. But I don't think this is an Indian problem. I think it's definitely something unique for some reason to millennials.
Yeah. Okay, my question really was, one of the things that Andy read out to me was, I was fascinated by it because it was to do with some school, I forget which government school, where you walked in and you saw that the teacher was getting some henna put on her hands by this girl. My question was that you obviously spoke to the teacher, but did you speak to any of the girls, and especially the girl who was putting the henna, as to how she felt? Because you do say in that chapter that the education system, we failed the children, really. So did you speak to any of the children? That's really my question.
I'm actually looking for that picture right now. It's on my phone, and I'll show it to you after.
So you weren't just ignoring my question?
No. I was looking for the picture on my phone, but I realized it's too small for me to hold up and everyone to see it.
Picture of what? You took a photo?
I took a photo of that, yeah. And I heard your entire question. To just provide context, what's being asked is, I went to this government school in Bihar, and I write about the computer lesson that was being conducted in a classroom where there were no computers. There was no computer. And instead, there was a blackboard where the teacher had written down 5 statements, true or false. And then on the right, there's a column where every student was coming up and writing true or false, whatever they believed was right. The first one was, computer is like a calculator. The second one is, computer can compute. Computer derives from the Latin word something. And then number 4 was, computer can do calculations. So 1 and 4 were the same. And then, sitting at the front is a teacher who's getting Mehndi applied. And I'll show you the photo after this. And I was, this is 2018-19. This is not an age anymore where we can fool around with this type of stuff. Like, your success in today's economy is very directly linked to how you use technology and the computer. And this is not a problem with that one school and that one teacher who was doing this. But by the way, in that school, there were 8 levels of 8 classes, but only 3 classrooms, out of which 1 classroom was being used for midday meals. So there were 2 classrooms, and the other kids were sort of being taught in the corridors outside. That same school, there were lots of investments that had been made, but like, for example, there were outdoor pipe fittings. But in one night, the local villagers had sort of removed the pipe fittings, and they'd sort of, taken them home or sold them or whatever. I'm forgetting, I did not speak to the student. No, I did not speak. I should have spoken to her. But the reason why I went to that school and other schools and colleges is I'm aware that millennials are not in school and college right now. The youngest millennial is 25. But I wanted to understand the schools and colleges that they did go to. And so if the condition is this today, then today minus 10, what was it like? And I can't even imagine what it would have been like for those kids who went to that school 10 years ago, because if the classroom in 2018, if the computer lesson is a statement of true and false, is about true and false statements, then what would it have been like 10 years ago? And in my book, I talk about someone from Jharkhand, which was previously a part of Bihar, and the challenges that he was facing in terms of upward mobility and in terms of trying to, get a new life for himself. And he definitely felt bound by the fact that he did not have these opportunities that people in bigger cities from better backgrounds had. And I think this is a real problem, because it can end up creating a lot of economic divisions, between the haves and the have-nots, which is something that, begins at a very early level at the education stage.
Anyone else? Okay, I think.
Okay.
I think it's time we ended today's discussion, and first of all, thank you everyone for coming. The few of you who have come here, we'll try to do another physical program in a month's time and see how it goes. And thanks mostly to
Thanks
Vivan.
for having me, and thanks everyone for coming. Yeah.
We discussed this a bit earlier, the risk involved in coming now and the risk involved in, coming 2 months later. So it had to be now. But thank you, Vivan, so much. And all the best for the book and the book tour across India, several places. He has been to Bangalore. You're in Bangalore recently.
I was in Bangalore right before this, and then Bombay and Delhi, and only Amritsar left, and no more after that. I've had my share. Yeah.
Okay. But thank you so much, really, for coming to the International Center.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.